Hey SCA, I'm Lee Unkrich. I graduated from SCA back in '91 and then went on to work at Pixar, where I directed Toy Story 3 and Coco. I'm counting on you to vote on November 3rd. It is super important. Did you know that only 56% of Americans even bothered voting in the 2016 election? That's crazy, right? And even worse, only 39% of people aged 18 to 24 voted. That was really lame, but I'm counting on you to not let that happen again. Elections make a difference. The people who get voted into office have the power to make your lives better or worse for decades to come. This is your one life you're living right now, and voting is one of the few things under your control that can genuinely make a difference. So don't be apathetic. Get out there and vote. Or vote absentee like I'm about to. However you do it, just vote. Oh, and I'm also encouraging you to make a short film for the 2020 Vote Movie Film Competition. But again, whatever you do, vote.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to quickly take a moment to echo Lee Unkrich and tell you that if you haven't received your vote by mail, it should be arriving soon if you live in California. And everyone, please make sure to vote. We're going to be having a contest on creating student PSAs. Another email about that will go out tomorrow. And I hope that you'll consider entering our contests to help encourage people across the country to make sure that they get out to vote, whether it's by mail or if in your place where it's safe to go to the polls in person. Tonight's discussion is going to be about the Netflix original documentary, The Social Dilemma, which is currently available on Netflix. And we have both director Jeff Orlowski and SCA alumnus Jonathan Pope, who shot all of the Vincent Carthaizer narrative portion of the film. So I'd really like to welcome them now, and we'll have a conversation between the three of us for about a half an hour. And then if you'd like to ask a question, the best way to do that is to put it in the Q&A box below at the bottom of your Zoom panel. And when we open it up to the audience, I'll invite you individually to join us on the panel for a moment. You can turn on your video at that point if your camera ready. If not, just make sure to use your mic so that we can hear you. And if you have something that you want me to ask, but you don't want to be on screen for, you can also put a note in there that I should just read it out loud. We do anticipate getting a lot of questions, so I am sorry in advance if we don't have time to cover all of them. But thank you guys. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Jeff, I think this is your third film in a row that we've had you for, do a Q&A for. Each time in a different circumstance. So I'm very excited that you're joining. Right. And Jonathan, it's always wonderful to have alumni back.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
right.
So I'm curious a little bit about the journey from Jeff. If you could start with the films that you were making to then transitioning to this. Obviously, Chasing Ice and Chasing Coral, they've got very similar themes, and then you dive into the tech world, which is eroding society in a much different way. Right. And I'm curious where that transition moment was for you as a maker.
I mean, honestly, I think they're all really big societal issues that are difficult to visualize. I think that's sort of been our sweet spot. What's the invisible? How do you visualize climate change? How do you visualize changing glaciers? How do you visualize changing coral reefs? How do you visualize the algorithms that are hiding on the other side of your screen? I think we've always just kind of tried to tackle really big concepts that have really high stakes for society as well. And climate change was a story and a visual landscape that we had access to, which is why we kind of pursued glaciers and coral reefs. And it was in 2017 when I started talking to some friends from Stanford that were talking about the tech and talking about what was going on and what they had helped build and contribute to, and they're reckoning with the way these business models are influencing our society. And once we saw that, and once we realized there was an opportunity there, I knew it was going to be a huge visual challenge. We wanted to really elevate the bar and give people a way to visually access it and jump into the story in a compelling way. We just kind of jumped in with both feet and figured we'd figure out our storytelling techniques over the course of making the film. And here we are a couple of years later.
I also feel like there might be, to some extent, maybe even subconsciously, the issue of you make films as visually powerful as Chasing Ice and Chasing Coral, where you can't really deny what you're watching, right? It's sort of the factual representation of climate change in a very non-abstract way. And yet, you know, it's still divided in this country because of climate deniers that really have only been amplified since social media had created the echo chamber. Absolutely. So I'm wondering, you know, is like exploring this part of a way of answering the question, like, even with all of this visual evidence, why hasn't the tide turned definitively towards accepting climate science?
Absolutely. For me, these issues are so inexorably linked. The thinking and the philosophy behind Chasing Ice and Chasing Coral very much was, as you're saying, like, what's the visual evidence? With a society that denied so much of the science, how could we show and prove for people that that might have been in denial and might have not had the right information, this is what's going on with our changing planet? It was actually in the impact work that we were doing with those films, the festivals on tour, traveling around the country, meeting people who were denialists about climate change, that we kept wondering, like, how was there so much denial? Why did so many people flat out reject the science? We have, like, look at all this overwhelming scientific information we have. How are people still unaware of what's going on? And I think that really is some of the seeds that were planted in the back of my mind around the social dilemma, was recognizing that, wait a second, there are people that are having information filtered to them around different issues. So if people are hearing a self-reinforcing perspective around climate as a hoax, for example, then it's going to be really, really hard to have a conversation around what you do about climate change if half the people coming into the room are flat out denying it. That's why we were really thrilled to include that scene in the film around the Google search. If you search for the phrase climate change you get different results based on who you are in different parts of the world. I'm actually reading this book right now, Algorithms of Oppression, and the cover is so powerful. It's the same concept in the Google breakdown. Why are Black women so fill in the blank? And those are the automated recommendations based on that particular search from that particular day that the author Sophia received. These algorithms aren't optimized towards the truth. They have a different intention in mind.
Wow. I had listened to Rabbit Hole earlier in the year.
Yes, that podcast, yeah.
Yeah, and learning about the intention of the algorithm and then its eventual, I guess, not necessarily its misuse, because it was created for the purpose of continuing to get people to watch.
Right.
But seeing the unintended consequences of it that then became knowledge to the companies and then ignored as a concern is really horrifying, especially when you take it out of the realm of cat videos and put it into the realm of news and politics.
Right. That podcast was preceded by some very deep news coverage in the New York Times. There was an article that came out last summer, The Making of a YouTube Radical. I believe that was the headline. And the story of that person was in many ways the backbone of the podcast that the New York Times team did. When our team read that article, that actually became a big inspiration for the narrative arc of Skylar Gisando's character. Was hearing about this radicalization through that coverage that the New York Times had done, and sort of planted those seeds around consequences that can happen to an individual. So that was an informative kind of inspirational piece for us in seeing what are the unintended consequences of these algorithms.
So tell us a little bit from the standpoint of the documentary side.
Yeah.
what the guiding questions were, and what you kind of discovered
Hmm.
as things that you wanted to explore that weren't like part of the original plan.
Right. Right. Great question. Um, the opening scene of the film, we have all of these tech insiders, executives, engineers, different employees that at the end of that opening scene, they're posed with the question, so what is the problem? And that actually was, for me, the big question of the first year or so was, okay, so I'm hearing these different critiques about the tech industry. I'm learning more and more about it, but like, what's the problem? What do I need to care about? That scene, we intentionally kind of leaned into the challenge and the discomfort and their struggle to answer that question, in large part because the issue has now gotten so complex that it's really, really hard to put your finger on a singular problem. First of all, there's no longer a singular tech industry coming out of Silicon Valley like there was 20, 30 years ago. Now technology exists in every industry, right? And you have police and judges that have algorithms that are offering prison sentencing. And there are employees, there are algorithms that a company can use to help filter out job applicants. And there are crazy ways that we're seeing algorithms interact with all different aspects of life. And so what we were really trying to do was to work with these insiders from the tech companies to look for, of all of these arguments that could be made, what is one of the biggest that's having one of the biggest consequences? And that's where we landed on the advertising business model, the micro-targeting, surveillance-driven advertising business model that powers our social media and search engines. It's the backbone of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat, TikTok. And those are the places where we're seeing real consequences. We're seeing misinformation go viral. We're seeing conspiracy theory going viral. We're seeing polarization, and we're seeing the impacts on mental health in a really big way as well. So it was an exploration there that we were really trying to dive into. We didn't want to critique. We weren't trying to cover the entire tech industry. We weren't trying to cover all algorithms as a whole. We were looking for this very, very specific argument. And that was a challenge. That was, many, many months of conversations, interviews, reading different books, looking for what is an argument that we can make in the film, and that is where we landed.
Tell us then about the material that you scripted, because as you mentioned, there's obviously visual challenges, but here you're essentially creating some case studies,
right,
and told through dramatization.
Yeah. There's a real, I'm thrilled to have this part of the conversation because I actually don't normally get to talk about this too much. And this was like the biggest creative challenge and excitement. This is where Jonathan and I got to work really, really closely together. The thinking and the origin of it came from a couple different places. One was we didn't want it to be a straight talking head film, right? That always was the lowest bar that we could aim for, which we knew we could pull off and just, string together the information and still the challenges of getting that constructed well. But we wanted to challenge ourselves creatively, and we wanted to think through what are the interesting ways we can bring this to life. One of the things that I found for me, I find that it's a really helpful process as I'm going in these early stages on a project to be talking about it with friends and family. And this is what I'm thinking about, and to share these ideas and to hear what resonates with people. It's sort of like live A/B testing and seeing like which ideas stick. And I found it was really challenging for the average person to really wrap their head around machine learning algorithms. Like, what exactly is going on? How exactly is it learning? How is it morphing and evolving? So that was always just a creative challenge in the back of my mind. Like, how do we bring that to life? We often reference The Big Short. And that was actually a starting point, was like, how do we do the Big Short version of a documentary? So instead of having a narrative storyline that hops into kind of explanatory sections, like if we had this explanatory documentary that could hop into narrative sections, that was a big inspiration. And then another big inspiration was Inside Out, another from Pixar, right? And thinking through in Inside Out, they anthropomorphized the emotions in the brain. And this was like a huge inspiration around like, okay, we can bring this to life. And it was those influences were in the back of our minds. And then we were talking with some of our subjects, trying to understand the algorithms and what they're doing and how they're optimizing. And we started joking about like, imagine if you saw Will Ferrell at a control panel and there's a human on the other side of the screen. The Woody Allen movie, Everything You Wanted to Know About Sex But Were Too Afraid to Ask, that was also another inspiration around like bringing to life things inside the body. And we just kept picturing Will Ferrell in this control panel with a whole bunch of people trying to puppeteer a human on the other side of the screen. And that idea just morphed and evolved and kind of continued to take shape. And then we realized instead of different vignettes and different scenes a la Big Short, we could do a singular narrative that hopefully would tie it all together and allow us to go back and forth between the documentary and this visual story that could bring this concept to life. And we can dive deeper, like the creative process of both writing that and editing and structuring that was a real challenge and a real curiosity for our team. But that was kind of the genesis. And there was just, we knew that there was an excitement there that we could tap into. And one last thought, I mean, I can rant about this for a long time, so cut me off or wherever you want to take the conversation. But another big testing point for us was we pulled some footage from the movie 8th Grade. Mm-hmm. And we ripped footage from the film and we edited it into the scene where the young girl, Isla, in the film is kind of going through her personal usage of her phone. And we're learning from Dr. Jonathan Haidt about how it's impacting teenagers and young girls in particular. So we just took some footage of a young girl on her phone and we just cut it against his interview just to see how it would feel. And the first time we did that, it was just a perfect test for us. It's like, okay, this is actually going to work. Like this footage is evoking the emotions that I think we can convey to an audience. And if we do that with our own crafted footage, we're going to be able to really elevate this tone and the emotion that we're trying to convey in that moment. So that was a really, really valuable test. I guess I'm reflecting on, there were a lot of little things that we tested throughout the process to give confidence in the idea mm-hmm. and confidence in the execution. Another really, really big stage was after we had it was like a 30 or 40 page script for the narrative story. And what we ended up doing was we storyboarded the whole narrative portions. I mean, very, very thorough storyboards with all the camera angles and all the scenes that we were envisioning. And one of our assistant editors just recorded some voiceover narration. And we then were able to edit together. Excuse me, here was the documentary. Here was how we wanted to transition into this narrative. And the documentary could sort of L-cut into seeing some new footage and then seeing the storyboards and hearing what that transition would look like, and then doing the handoff to a narrative story and back and forth. And so that was actually a really, really important step for us. We watched the film with the entire narrative cut into it, and we were able to see the shape and the timing and the pacing of both of these worlds. How are they going to interact or not? We actually trimmed the narrative quite a bit back from the original intention, just because I felt like the balance wasn't quite landing the way I was hoping. We really I wanted it to be grounded in the truth of the matter, like the experts and the testimony coming from all of these amazing people that we're able to capture on film in our interviews, and then use the narrative portions to bring that to life and to continue the story.
Mm. Jonathan, can you jump in and talk a little bit about what that process is like in terms of integrating documentary and dramatic footage so that it's not disruptive, but actually feels like it flows very organically one into the next?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the whole process was super interesting because I've worked on documentaries before, but never worked on anything that was a documentary with this original narrative section. So that was an interesting challenge, because when Jeff and his team reached out to me, they had, like you mentioned, the cut that had all the storyboards laid out. So it was really great to be able to see that, yeah, this could work and that can flow. So we got into production very quickly. So it was a really exciting, we had a lot of very, kind of instinctual conversations about creative choices that happened very quickly. So we kind of landed on the camera almost immediately. We used the same camera that they used for the doc side, which was the Red Monstro. And then as far as lensing it goes, I had proposed to Jeff using anamorphic just to kind of give it a distinct look from the documentary. So as you're watching, when you're in mm-hmm. with the experts and when you're in with this, explanatory section. So that was a really cool kind of whirlwind process right. to get into.
And I'm curious your thoughts, Jonathan. This was interesting to hear from all of the actors and the talent on that side of the camera, but they got to watch the movie before we filmed any of their parts. Like in some sense, like we had a whole cut of the film and the whole structure and the backbone before we shot the narrative portions.
Right.
That was interesting for the actors for sure.
Yeah, and that was interesting working on that side of it too, because I think one thing that Jeff and I found that was interesting as we went was, you know, what was cut in as far as storyboards go. It's different saying a drawing versus a performance. So having the storyboards in there was great to say, yeah, the story is going to work. But then when you're in there with a, you know, a live human being giving a genuine performance, you know, sometimes you want to hang on it more, sometimes you want to hang on it less. So it was a kind of a push and pull, trying to figure out how closely we wanted to stick to the storyboards and how much we wanted to add to it, or, you know, get just an additional complementary angle on something. So that was a fun process too.
I'm curious if you guys can talk about the design of the Vincent Carthaizer side of the story.
Yeah. It was always in my mind, it was the reason why we were doing the narrative portion at all, was to bring to life that side of the story inside the AI box that is controlling the feed. And when we got Vinny on board, it was just that he was like a perfect fit for that role. We then, because we were debating how we wanted to handle that originally, we had these 3 roles and we were debating if we needed 3 people. But then the idea and the concept of using one person in triplicate was another fun challenge. And I thought it worked perfectly for the story. And then it was conversations with Jonathan around how are we going to pull this off technically. And so that was a really crammed time period. As Jonathan was saying, we were really rushing for Sundance deadlines. We just were ambitious in wanting to put the film together for Sundance. We felt that that was the timeline and the best place for us to premiere the film. In retrospect, with COVID, like, we got very, very lucky as well. So great kudos to the team for pulling it off. But it was something where once we had this concept in mind, we knew that we could pull it off technically, and then it was the excitement of just executing on it. And we used, Jonathan, I don't know if you want to talk through that a little bit too, the Milo and a motion capture device so that we could do repeated camera movements with Vinny in different performances.
Sure. Yeah. So from the very beginning, from my very first conversation with Jeff, he had mentioned the idea of doing motion capture, obviously for the visual effects side of it. And throughout production, we filmed the Vincent sections towards the end of production. So we kind of, throughout our films or shooting in Colorado, we're able to kind of prep for that along the way. So we were exploring different motion capture control systems, and we ended up landing on the Milo, which, you know, for various reasons, but mostly we kind of had the shots in mind of what we wanted to get. And Jeff had these really great ideas for these sweeping shots where we come around the console to reveal all 3 of them. But the motion control system was absolutely crucial to the whole process. And we worked with a couple of great VFX teams, Mass Effects in Colorado and Ingenuity in LA. And we had, you know, our VFX supervisors on set to kind of make sure that we were doing everything correctly. But yeah, that was a really cool process.
Yeah, and it was trying to get as much leverage out of that device as possible. It's such a big machine and requires quite a bit of time and setup for both the track and for the movement itself. So trying to program a couple of different moves and concepts that would work. And then it was really just a big performance challenge around having Vinny have other body doubles that he can act off of and play with, but then getting the timing to work well so that he could deliver a line as one character and then hop to the second and hop to the third, so that would work seamlessly as the camera was moving. So those were some fun technical challenges that worked out pretty well on set and then came together pretty seamlessly in post. For the most part.
I want to ask you guys a couple of questions that maybe are a little bit generational in nature, and my guess is that you're both younger than I am. So it's a question that I'm asking really as someone who grew up without even, you know, cell phone technology in college. So I'm curious to know if after making this film, how your own personal approach to social media and smartphones has changed. if at all?
Yeah. I have a lot to say on that, but Jonathan, I don't know if you want to kick it off or if there's anything you'd like to share.
Yeah, I forget who says it in the film, but I think it was actually Tristan in the film. He's talking about how he feels the pull of his phone, even if he's not looking at it directly, he just feels the pull of it. And that is something that perfectly encapsulates how I feel about it too. And especially being in film where so much of our business is kind of, on the fly, in a minute, messaging back and forth with people. So I think post filming and post learning everything I learned just in the process, I've really tried to catch myself when I feel the need to check it every 5 seconds. I think it definitely gave me an awareness of my own relationship to my dependency on it, and trying to find a way to control it without it controlling me.
Yeah. Alex, to your question, I'm 36 years old. I got my first Nokia phone my senior year in high school, and Facebook came out my sophomore year in college. And I was one of those immediate early adopters. I used to work actually, along with two of the subjects in our film, Tristan Harris and Jeff Seibert. We were all Apple campus reps at Stanford. My job at Stanford, I was selling Apple computers as much as possible. Millions of dollars of computers went through the Stanford bookstore. And so I'm a huge technologist and have always loved the latest technology. And, 10 years ago, if you had asked me, if I could plug a chip in my brain and be connected to the internet, I would have been the first person to sign up. But now I've become skeptical of the companies that control the gateways and the access to so much of the internet. And social media and search are companies that are driven through this business model whose incentives aren't aligned for us, the public. And I think this has been the big realization for me in the course of making the film. When is the technology aligned with us, the user? When is it a tool for us? Versus when does it have other goals that may or may not be clear to us? So Adobe Photoshop or Adobe Premiere are not trying to manipulate you to get you to come back to spend more time, because the more time you spend on it, the more money they make, right? Premiere is just a tool. Zoom is a tool that's sitting here waiting for us to use it, waiting for us to engage with it. This is one of the most powerful concepts in the film for me that Tristan talks about, the bicycle for the mind. Steve Jobs always considered a computer a bicycle for the mind. The bicycle is just a tool that sits there, but when you get on it, you can move much faster and farther. And the computer took that for the human brain and human capacity, and it allowed us to expand our creativity and our capabilities. That's the exciting part of technology for me, right? Artificial intelligence could be used for our benefit, but it is in many ways now being used against us, right? I want my doctor to know everything about me and have a model of my body, and I want them to be able to give me better medicine based on what my body's doing. I don't want my insurance company to be preventing me from getting healthcare based on that, right? So for me, these were thoughts and realizations that came out during the making of the film. I completely removed myself from social media 2 years ago. I was a very, very heavy social media user, and I've completely removed myself from it because I recognized the manipulative intent behind the systems and what it was trying to get me to do. And it started to make me feel, just was really turned off by it, and just was really, it was very unappealing to me to take part in it. So for the last 2 years, I've been completely cold turkey on social media. I've removed all of it. I'm still using Zoom and FaceTime and other messages to communicate with my family and friends, right? And Jonathan, as you were saying, I'm text messaging and signaling all the time with my team, with my family. I don't see those as being bad uses of technology. Those are ways that I can communicate efficiently with people that I need to communicate with. But those are also things that I'm trying to do direct to the person and to not have it moderated or mediated by some other third party.
Yeah, I mean, I have, so I'm 40, so we're pretty much, we had the same experiences growing up in terms of the things available to us. But one thing that I can say for sure is that when Facebook came around, and immediately wiped out Friendster and MySpace, I remember the one thing about it was that it allowed me to connect to people I hadn't spoken to in something like 15 years.
Right.
people from my childhood, whatever. And I feel like that is a generationally different thing to some extent, because now people grow up with Facebook, so they are never out of touch with those people and don't need it as a search engine to mine the past.
I mean, the other thing too is like most Gen Zers aren't even using Facebook. They're on TikTok or Snapchat, right? And it's now a completely new generation of technology. So Facebook has become an obsolete platform for many youth. And I think this is the thing. Each platform has its own sort of sweet spot and niche that has reverse engineered a particular type of mind or personality, in my mind. So you've got your video-based content on YouTube. You've got your very visual-based content on Instagram or to some degree Snapchat. You have your like short-form text on Twitter that has leaned more towards politics and news. Each of these is finding a different sort of mindset and personality type that lands in those different platforms, I believe. And those are the places where we're seeing misinformation and conspiracy theory, right? Those misinformation and conspiracy theory aren't going viral on Netflix or Hulu or Amazon or Sirius XM or most podcasts, where it's a very, very different model.
I'm curious if in the process of exploring this, you guys ever came across any vision of changing the monetization process for some of these things? Because
absolutely,
I would gladly pay Facebook a small amount of money every month,
right,
for what it is supposed to do,
right.
If I can get rid of all of the other crap. Oh, I think I lost you there for a second, Jeff.
Oh no, he's frozen.
Did I freeze there, or was that
the internet didn't
You're back.
hear what you had to say?
Okay, cool. I'm just also going to quit some background things while we're at it. But I did hear your question, and there are alternative models that do exist. I think Facebook has not switched to a subscription model because they've calculated that they'll make less money than they currently do. They give it away for free because that's how they make the most money. So I think that's based on internal research that has been done at Facebook in particular. But there are platforms that are considering a subscription model. And if they get the price point right, and honestly, if they make the products compelling enough that people want to use them, then they're going to find a really strong user base there. But a model exists like subscriptions, like we're discussing. So just the way, Netflix or HBO operate. There's a model that exists around data storage, similar to sort of like Apple iCloud, where, okay, you've got 10 years of my history of photographs, or you've got how many gigabytes of photographs and material that I want to save on these platforms because this has become my photo library. That's one option that's been suggested. There's an option suggested around follower count. So similar to like your MailChimp list, and based on how many people you're blasting out to, you pay based on, do you have 1,000 followers, or do you have 1 million followers, and those are worth different amounts of money. Then there are other models that flip it completely and just charge more like a utility. So is the data that's being collected being taxed as a utility, just as if you're taxing water or air or carbon? And so there are a lot of different models that have been discussed. I think one of the challenges is that most of those models would not be as financially profitable as this, let's give it away for free and just get everybody's eyeballs, and let's let the advertisers monetize it. Keep in mind, like, we don't pay anything for these products, yet they're worth hundreds of billions of dollars, right? There's a huge gap in that value between what we are considering the value of zero, as we just give it our time and no money, versus how much money they've churned out through the system. But absolutely, I think there are alternative models that are very, very viable. And that's the thing that we need to be moving towards.
Right. I know that we have a ton of questions, so
yeah, cool.
I do want to open it up, and let me just quickly see what we've got. So I know that our first question, unfortunately, she had to leave at 6:30, 9:30 her time. So let's go out to a current production student, Federico Arboleda. And Federico, I'm going to invite you over, and you can turn on your video when you come over.
Oh. I'm back.
There
awesome.
All right.
Sweet, dude. You are muted though. You're muted,
Oh.
Federico.
Oh, see, that's the problem with Zoom, because yeah, I've been growing a little narrative on Zoom with the backgrounds and the filters. It's been
Nice.
fun.
Very nice. Well, I will pair that for you with this one, straight from the movie. A little puppeteering action going on.
That's phenomenal.
But yeah, what's your question?
Yeah, so I was going to ask, a couple of my friends saw the movie and they were deeply impacted by it, as was I. And they told me that even though they wanted to get off these medias and try to diminish the use, because one of them was using YouTube for like 6 hours a day,
Wow.
they don't believe they can. And I wanted to ask you, what's your opinion on why people know a problem, but they lack the will to solve it?
Why do people still smoke cigarettes even though we know that it is not good for you? Right? Why are we still burning fossil fuels when we know that that's not good for society? It's a great question, and it's a challenging one. And I think in particular for a Gen Z experience right now, everybody in society, like the whole peer group is on these platforms together, right? So there are a couple different aspects. One is like the personal, they've reverse engineered the things that you're most interested in. So it's just really, really like attractive and alluring to want to go onto these platforms. Like they're just giving you content that absolutely works on your brain. But the second part is like the social validation that's coming from an entire community of friends that are on those platforms. And so in many cases, we've just become addicted to the validation and the affirmation. So when I was weaning myself off of social media, I'm going to turn my background off just because it's distracting me. As I was trying to wean myself off of, for me, it was Facebook in particular. I was also then learning about the resurrection algorithms that Facebook deploys. So if you're a heavy user and then you stop using the platform, they consider you dead. And they have to resurrect you to get you to come back. And they start fishing with a whole bunch of different things to test what's going to get so-and-so to come back to the platform. And so I was getting emails for a long time and that didn't really work, but here's like somebody tagged you in a photo and somebody did this and here's the thing. And then they switched over to text messages and I was starting to get all these different messages around like, here's somebody from the film industry, here's an editor that you've worked with, here's blah, 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 here's a family member that did this thing. Then it was like, here's a girl that you had a crush on in high school. I literally remember seeing a name suggested and I totally had a crush on her in high school. And when that notification came in, I was like, I was so disgusted by these platforms at that point that I was like, I'm done with it. And I didn't want to have anything to do with it at that point. So in fact, the resurrection algorithm sort of backfired in their case with me as I was learning about it. And I then wanted to remove myself from it. The challenge though is like, if your entire friend circle is using one of these platforms, you have to sort of get the whole friend circle to migrate off of them and to do that together. But can you switch to a text message group or some other messaging group or a signal group where you can still have conversation and communication and share images and share videos and things like that, but it's not being moderated. It's not like public broadcasting in the same way. Just one other little anecdote to share. Working in film, I've gone to countless film festivals, and there were times where I found myself walking up to a celebrity to take a photograph for the sole purpose of posting it, recognizing that, oh, I know this is going to get a freaking lot of likes. And when I realized that, I saw how exploitative and transactional that was. Like, here's this other human whose work I admire and appreciate, but I'm not even really talking to them. It's just the whole goal was to take a photograph for the however many hundreds of likes were going to come in. And I just knew it was going to be really well received. And when I realized that, I kind of became disgusted at the performative nature of it. Like, it wasn't helping me or anybody else. And it was just like this ego boost and the status symbol that I was trying to lean into. So those realizations for me just really changed my perspective of what was I trying to share for what reasons. But you're asking a great question, and it's a tough one. My real hope is that new technology is developed such that it makes it really, really easy for people to want to change from these platforms, because there are better platforms that just make you feel better when you're using it. Like imagine social media that made you feel better after you used it. Like can somebody make that?
Right, social media that's private, that's educational, that would be the dream.
Right. And I think we can go
Well,
down that path. I think that'll exist. Certainly in the next 5 years. I just think it's a matter of how fast can that come out.
thank you for making this film.
Thank you so much, Federico.
I mean, we needed it, for sure.
Yeah, thanks. There's one thing that I've had a bunch of people tell me was that the film helped them now understand why they feel the way that they feel. And that was just a huge sort of affirmation and validation for me around like this. Hopefully this is a perspective and a lens that can help explain the reason why people are feeling the way they do in the world.
The person who asked this next question actually had to leave, but I wanted to ask it, and
Yeah.
we'll share this with her later. So this is from Ella Grace Rodriguez, who is a first-year student. To what extent do you believe that the issue of algorithms creating a rise in political turmoil, fascism, fake news, and whatnot is an inherently unique issue developed from technology in the modern age? Or perhaps, how is it different than other periods of turmoil? In other words, to what extent do you believe that the problems rising from new technology are inherently different than wars caused by technology of the past?
Right. Yeah.
Like yellow journalism, television propaganda, etc.
Yeah, that's a really, really great question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just told that she's here, but I had looked her up a second ago and didn't see her. So let me bring her over so that you can.
Cool. Yeah, please. And if there's any nuance to the question that you'd like to add or clarify.
Hi there. I'm so sorry, Alex, for the confusion. I'm also doing a call with Women of Cinematic Arts, and I just got off for a few minutes. But Jeff and Jonathan, it is such an honor to just see you. I guess if you had any questions for clarifying, I was just wondering, because my dad and I mean, my whole family, we watched it and we loved it.
Cool.
And one of the things that we were wondering is this continuity and change over time. And if you could just address that, I guess.
Yeah, Tristan has this line that we tried to work into the film where it's like, oh, everybody's like, oh, we've always had bombs and then we've always had the latest thing. And Tristan's like, no, but this is like, we've always had bombs, but now this is like a nuclear weapon. Like this is not the next small increment. This is a massive, massive shift. And I firmly very much believe that. And it's hard because like we look at these things and it's like, what the hell is going on there? But there is a machine learning algorithm that's customized for each and every one of us that is putting us in our own Truman shows, that is using really powerful computing to figure out what's going to work on each and every one of us. So there are a lot of different ways we can take this question, but I do genuinely think this is very, very different than any type of technology we've had in the past. And some of the touch points that I would offer as kind of anecdotal evidence is like, okay, we've always had conspiracy theories, right? There's always been conspiracy theories around a lot of different things, but we're now getting to a point where high school students are questioning their teachers around flat Earth. And students are saying, no, my teacher has gotten sucked into the round earther cult and that they don't realize what's going on. And I'm hearing all sorts of different conspiracy theories that students are coming to science class with and confronting teachers on, that this is like a new echelon of misinformation. Right. And so Roger Ebert calls films empathy machines, right? The ability to see another face, our mirror neurons light up, we can engage and hear conversation and connect with a person. But on YouTube, you can have people just espousing anything that is really, really persuasive in some cases. And it's not optimized for truth. There is no fact checking. There is no journalistic integrity. And yet if an algorithm finds it to be successful, the algorithm will push it and promote it. So this isn't just like truth is on a neutral playing field. Outrageous things do better. Lies spread 6 times faster than truth on Twitter. Right? So with all of those kind of touch points, this is a very, very unique moment in time where it's never been easier to take misinformation and to spread it virally. Like the algorithms are just pouring lighter fluid on every idea. Right? Anything that comes in. The mantra of YouTube, Facebook, Twitter is like, give us everything. We're going to pour lighter fluid on all of it and see what sticks, because That's the whole business model. And only if something is really egregious against our terms of service will then manually go in and remove it or try to remove that, right? And it's all reactionary. It's not a matter of like what's coming in the front door. So I don't know. I think there have been a number of people, including there's a brief moment in the film at the Chicago Boot School when Tristan was talking there, where, you know, people in the boomer generation are like, oh, this is nothing new. And it's like, this is very, very new technology. This is incredibly powerful and persuasive. And the other thing I would suggest, this is something I've been offering to a lot of people, to do a reality swap. So if there's a family member that you disagree with, that it's like harder and harder to talk about politics with, look at their social media feeds and show them your social media feed and see what is working on them. This is something that our writer Vicky Curtis and I did early on in the production, where I took her Facebook feed and looked at her Facebook feed, she looked at mine, and what was working on me didn't work on her, and what was working on her would not have worked on me. Like mine was all like 2016 election fallout, hers was bunny rabbits and baby photos, and I just like, I would not have lasted long scrolling through that, yet it was incredibly persuasive for her.
How do I get her algorithm?
Exactly. Well, it's funny, like I've been referencing this. The President of the United States has a customized feed, his own customized Truman Show on Twitter, and nobody has any idea what the President of the United States sees on a daily basis. We can all tune into Fox News, which we understand that he watches, and we can see what he sees on Fox News. We can all drive down the street in DC and see what billboards are surrounding his world. We can have a conversation around the information going into the White House through those platforms. But literally there's a personalized information, like mind warp platform that is customized just for him, that is fed to him on a daily basis. And this, I'm not trying to bring up any particular politics about the president. My point here is that every single one of us has our own customized, reverse engineered, personalized news. Like the idea of personalized news it's such an oxymoron, it shouldn't exist, right? But that's what we are all dealing with on a daily basis now. So I'd hope maybe you can take this back to your family or your father or whomever you're speaking with and kind of share these notes.
Oh yeah, no, we were just discussing it, like not with like either side, just like, well, this like other stuff has happened before, what makes this different? And we did look into the flat
Right.
earth thing, like that what happened at my high school and people had stickers
Really?
for it. So I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. It was more of a joke. I don't think people actually took it seriously, but like the idea and the concept that like that would just even be discussed.
Haven't we also found that some of this stuff does sort of start in that realm of like, well, this is crazy, so I'm going to post it. And then it becomes legit when people see how much traction it gets. There's another film that we're going to bring to campus in a week or so called the Selling Lies by Leslie Iwerks. It's a short 30-minute doc about the people in North Macedonia who were
awesome.
to just,
Great.
like write these crazy stories, and they weren't doing it with a specific political bias. They were doing it and replicating whatever got traction, and that happened to be things that were conspiratorial in nature, that supported Trump, that were anti-Hillary, etc.
That's awesome. Please connect me with that team. I was thinking of doing a film specifically on this exact thing, just because like it has become profitable for people to just make fake news and push it out on the internet. Like literally it is worth doing, because the more outrageous lies you make, you just make enough money to make a living. Like that, it is absurd that we have a system that incentivizes that. But that is the information ecosystem that we've created. There's a parallel I draw. This comes from Shoshana Zuboff, the woman in the film who wrote the book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. She says that industrial capitalism figured out ways to turn nature into a raw resource for extraction. And surveillance capitalism has figured out how to turn human nature into a raw resource for extraction, right? And we're just able to like make up this fake information, and it is now profitable, and the whole system is just out of whack. But this parallel between like industrial capitalism has broken down our natural ecosystem, And now the surveillance capitalism has broken down our information ecosystem. Like the information that we have access to, the idea of truth has broken down now, in my mind, because of these platforms that have eyeballs as the goal, and truth doesn't matter.
Okay, Ella, I'll let you get back to your Zoom multitasking.
Well, thank you,
Thanks,
Alex.
Ella.
I appreciate it. Thank you guys
Really
again.
appreciate it. Thanks.
I'm going to bring on Kapena next. I know that his question had some overlap with Ella's, but maybe has a little bit of different nuance. So I'm going to bring you over, Kapena. And Kapena is getting his MFA in Peter Stark producing.
Oh, sweet. And I love you moderating all of this because I don't have to look at all the questions in the Q&A that's coming in.
How are you doing,
Kapena, awesome. I love your hat.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm here on the ancestral land of the Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne people here in Boulder, Colorado.
Amazing. Coming to you live from Tongva land, same with Alex. So good that you're able to do that. I really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of said kind of the Pee Wee Herman secret word that I was looking for this entire kind of Q&A, and I bet you think what I think you know what it is. And you know, I sleep with a portrait of Karl Marx right next to my bed, and the word I'm looking for is capitalism, right?
Yes.
And I really appreciate the film in terms of, you know, all the kind of things that you're pointing out already. But I think the thing that was really missing for me inside of it was that word capitalism, right? And how much everything that's happening now at the upper echelons of tech has to do with the profit incentive, right? The fact that, you know, they're creating all these algorithms and stuff to addict people to a platform, mostly to provide people with ads, right? To sell people something so that there's some kind of return on it. And Facebook and Google will, you know, take
destroy the ISIS caliphate and took down their leader al-Baghdadi.
Oh, sorry. James, I don't know if I did that or not, but I got to mute you.
Somebody came in. Yeah.
So anyway,
it was just James's mute got
mute.
Yeah.
So anyway, I really just wanted to know what your perspective is in terms of, you know, what role does our current economic system, 4 decades of liberal capitalism, rising wealth and inequity, have to do with everything that we're happening now, or in what ways can we even count on tech to even fix that in the first place, right?
Right. I mean, 100%. It's a direct correlation there. I do feel like we did address this and bring this up in the film. It might not be to everyone's satisfaction, but in particular, we've always called it Justin Rosenstein's mic drop. It's in part around the climax of the film where he talks about this comparison between whales and trees and how we've been turned into a resource. And as long as a whale is more profitable dead than alive, we're going to continue to destroy our natural ecosystem. And now humans are worth more as a mindless zombified version that's staring at a screen rather than living fulfilling lives. In his monologue there actually was additional language that he used explicitly about neoliberal capitalism in the original interview. We did decide to pull out some of that very explicit language in the sense that in thinking through the audiences that I wanted the film to resonate with, many of them are neoliberal capitalists in the Bay Area who are operating here. And I find that you can only push somebody so far before they kind of switch gears and then become averse to the message in the first place. And that is a fine balance, and that is a challenging balance. It's something that, let me just use Chasing Coral for an example, because we had a scene in Chasing Coral that explicitly, like in Act 3 of the film, it was explicitly all these scientists saying, we need to stop burning fossil fuels. And it was like this barrage of all these scientists just saying the same thing. And I had conservatives come up to me after a screening of the film and say, you had me the entire movie until that one moment, and then it made it feel like propaganda. And in the challenge and the decision of an artist thinking through who's your audience and what message are you trying to convey to that particular audience, I chose to pull that out of the out of Chasing Coral in that case, because I wanted a message to work for people who are skeptical of climate change. My hope is that people who are familiar with the capitalist critique are seeing that embedded throughout the film.
Right.
And while we're not really making it like hit you over the head explicit, that it can serve as this entrance point to people who might not be as on board with the message. And how do you infiltrate somebody's heart and emotions and get them to recognize, well, wait a second, maybe there is something wrong with this business model that we've been operating off of. And how do you get them to question their own values in a way that invites participation as opposed to shuts them down? And I think this is really, from my perspective, one of the opportunities of film, as to quote Ebert again, like as an empathy machine to build bridges. Film has this really powerful ability to build bridges between communities. That's where stories and that's where empathy are extremely key. And I think from my perspective as a storyteller who's trying to use films and these pieces of art as a medium to hopefully enable some shift in the world and to enable some change, I find that going in with the olive branch is just a little bit more inviting than going in with a hammer. And
the sickle.
Yes. And so, but like, what is the way that you get somebody to be open to hearing that critique? It's really, really challenging when you're trying to make one singular piece that's going to a huge, huge audience, and you're never going to land for everybody, right? But with Chasing Coral, with that climate film, they were friends of mine. There was a friend of mine whose parents were climate skeptics, and I had dinner with them one night, and I convinced them to open their mind about the realities of climate science through this conversation and through the evidence and facts that I was able to bring to the table. I always had them in the back of my mind for the audience for that film. It's like somebody who is they're wanting or willing to be open-minded. They don't just they might not have the right information, but like, how can the film be a Trojan horse of sorts? Like, how can the film like invite engagement but still deliver a message? And so in many ways that has been the hope in how I've been thinking about some of these types of storytelling.
Thank you.
I love your question, and I'm completely with you on the core aspect of the issue and the problem that we need to face. One other thing to add there is that these tech companies they're stuck in the limits of the capitalist stock market system, where even if they wanted to make change, they have this like legal requirement to a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders.
Right.
So they couldn't even easily make change without potential lawsuits coming in from their shareholders and saying, oh, we don't care about the good of society. You have an obligation to do what's right for the bottom line. And this is a really, really complex set of problems that are overlapping and really intricate. And like, how do we solve all of them? Like, we need a massive and radical shift in thinking to solve lots of these problems simultaneously. Maybe you can make that film.
Thinking about it. Thinking about it right
perfect.
now.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Dev.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, moving you back over.
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to bring on David Frank. And David, before I do that, I know you've written several questions and they're actually all quite good, but we have a lot of questions still to come. So try and maybe focus on the first and the third, I think, for just the sake of the flow of the conversation.
All right, guys. Yeah, so thank you so much for this film. I really liked the film, and thank you, Alex, for moderating. If it's okay, I'll just ask the third question. That's I think the one that I'm most interested in hearing about. So the question was, oh, you know what? When I came in, it took it away from me. But
I'm sorry.
I think I basically remember it. So
was this the Netflix great hack question, or?
Yeah. So the fact that Netflix is distributing your film, obviously they have a very complex and very proprietary algorithm that they don't share with people. And they've distributed your film and also The Great Hack in 2019, which covers a lot of similar themes about monetization of and commodification of human behavior. I guess I'm just interested in to what extent does this like righteous fear and anger at the system get just co-opted into the system through those algorithms?
You ask a really brilliant and great question. I think the challenge is, where else can you distribute a movie that's going to get a global population to see the film, and to catch a story? And certainly Netflix has algorithms in usage, right? Obviously, that's a big part of your question there. But as we were saying earlier with the business model, people are going into Netflix knowing and looking for entertainment and an expectation there. And it is something that we're paying for that is serving us as a customer. It is very different in my mind than YouTube's algorithms or other algorithms that have a different profit motive in mind, that also don't have human curation. So this is another part of this, because user-generated content versus human-curated content have very different impacts on society in my mind, where the misinformation and conspiracy, you don't see misinformation and conspiracy theory going viral on Netflix or Hulu or HBO or Amazon Prime, right? Nor on most reputable news sources, nor on SiriusXM or other places where you're paying for the content, because there are editors, like there are human editors that are saying, no, this is BS. This has no scientific validity. This has no fill in the blank. But that isn't the case with the social media and search engines. They have an editor that has no rubric for truth or no values for truth. The editor is just the algorithm saying, I'm going to be the custom editor for each and every one of you. So David has their own editor just giving you more and more stuff that you are going to engage with. And so I don't know, I think that's the first thought there. We've been, personally, I mean, I've been very, very grateful for Netflix for distributing the film and getting it out to a global audience. We're operating as an independent film production company. So both with Chasing Coral and with The Social Dilemma, we raised all the funding independently. We made the film on our own. We brought it to Sundance, and we assessed where the best distribution partner could be for the film. And we felt like Netflix was a really, really good fit for this film, and as our last film, Chasing Coral, for the aspect of a global audience. And I think just based on the response to the film and the fact that people are talking about it so much is in my mind affirmation that it's getting out there, it's getting seen widely, people are having the conversation, and that really was our goal in the first place.
Yeah, I was definitely struck by how little blowback I've seen on the internet towards the film. Like, not a lot of people saying like this is a pack of lies, other than of course, Facebook's PR post that they made on Twitter.
Yeah, they wanted to claim that we are not the product in that response, and I don't know. I just find that, like, if everybody stopped using Facebook or Instagram, there would be nothing for them to sell. Like, there'd be no opportunity for them to monetize eyeballs. If people stopped using Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime, there still is content being made that's available for anybody to purchase, right? But that's not the case with social media, and that's not the case with the other platforms that are really, it's an ad placement business. It's a personalized private billboard company that follows you around and is constantly changing and figuring out how many billboards can I put in front of everybody in the world as regularly as possible. But yeah, thank you, David. Thank you for that. Yeah.
And thank you.
Thanks, David. While I'm grabbing the next guest, someone asked if you could put the book cover back up on screen.
Oh yeah, this one, Algorithms of Oppression by Sophia Noble. I'm only that far into the book right now. I was just learning about it recently this summer. Also, I'd recommend this. I was showing some friends earlier, Weapons of Math Destruction by Kathy O'Neill. And if you're really, really interested, this is in many ways the Bible of it all. This took me so much time to read. This is probably also the most annotated book I've ever read, where every other page it was like, holy, like it was like mind-blowing. I mean, I could literally just flip to any page and share with you some crazy insight around how all of this works. But we will save that for another masterclass of some sort.
Wow. Okay, so we have Karen, who's a current media arts and practice student.
Hi Jeff. This is so crazy. I just want to say before I jump into my question, chasing Cora has changed my life.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, I'm from Hawaii actually, and I got Hawaii to
Cool.
pass bills for corals.
Oh my goodness.
Actually, yeah, and
Hell
my involvement
yes.
in
Congratulations.
film. Thank you. My involvement in film really, I think, stemmed from that documentary. So this is insane.
Oh my goodness. I appreciate that so much. You're
Thank
so
you
awesome.
so much.
Yeah.
But my question was kind of going off, like, I had this, after watching your thing, I was really considering like, okay, do I go off on social media? But as a media arts and practice student, I think a lot of students understand that they're going to be producing media possibly for these platforms like Instagram, I don't know, TikTok, whatever. So is it like important for students to stay on to like monitor trends and stuff? And like, also I'm like trying to build a portfolio like through Instagram, you know, possibly gain popularity or whatever. But like, I don't know, this whole dilemma about like, should I stay on? Should I just completely like, you know, get away from it? I just want to hear what you think.
I would recommend another book for you, which is somewhere on that shelf, Jaron Lanier's 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. And part of what Jaron says is if you're privileged enough to get off of social media, that you have a positive responsibility to get off of social media. And he acknowledges that not everybody can get off of these platforms. And if your livelihood or if your career depends on it, from his perspective, then it makes sense to use it. I think for me personally, you're posing a really, really great question. And I think this is in many ways why we called it a dilemma in the first place, is because these are challenging things. As it's become the public square and as people are conducting business on it, it blurs the lines between the personal engagement and the professional usage and opportunity. And I would say, if you're just really thoughtful and intentional about how you're using it and why you're using it, that is in many ways the best indicator that I think you can find. So are you using it 4 to 6 hours a day, scrolling mindlessly and clicking through and being used as a tool in the system? Or are you watching very specific things that people are sharing with you? Are you trying to study it, to study trends in content making? Are you like, a good old website is a perfect portfolio too, right? You don't need, right? And so there are different ways that you can think about a portfolio and what represents the work that you're trying to put out into the world. I personally have completely stopped using social media, and as a director, I don't find any need to be on it. That the work that I want to do, and you are muted, Karen, just so in case you're saying anything that you want to come through. But the work that I'm interested in doing is on the long form filmmaking side, where I don't need a social media presence to be able to do that. I think it's also different if you're a cinematographer. John, I'm curious your thoughts on like, how do you think you need to show your work to the world? You know, if you're a stylist, if you do makeup, if you do like to be able to show regular content to people that might be curious is potentially valuable. But I do think of it as more of a portfolio placement. That's the valuable thing for most people in terms of, you know, and that's whether that's on Instagram or that's just on an actual website, you can still accomplish a portfolio through a lot of different means.
Yeah,
Jonathan,
I totally agree.
My
Instagram is, I completely agree with you. My Instagram is essentially just a portfolio that redirects to my website. I try to not, not engage in it in anything beyond just pure business.
There's another thing that I've installed called the Newsfeed Eradicator. So this is a plugin that applies to, I believe, just Facebook and Twitter. But if I went to facebook.com, like nothing would show up for me to scroll through. Like there's just no feed to engage with. And so I can still send a message to somebody, or if I still wanted to make a post, I can still do things like that. And I can still potentially monitor responses to a post, but there's nothing that's there that can suck my time in and attention for me to scroll endlessly on. So those are just some thoughts on that front, but it is really, really challenging for people where certain industries have moved to these platforms, and it's considered like there's an assumption that you need to be on the platforms for people to recognize your work. But I don't know if that's the case. I still think, you know, there's a mindset, there's a phrase that a friend of mine shared with me in college that was always this mantra that stuck in the back of my mind. He also was a filmmaker and musician, and this was something that inspired him. And he always said, "Be so good that they can't ignore you." And that quote, I like wrote it on a sticky that was on my machine for a long time, like, be so good they can't ignore you. And like, for me, it was, can you just make content and do work that's meaningful enough and powerful enough that you get natural word of mouth through the work in and of itself? You know, Tesla doesn't advertise. They don't spend any money on advertising. It's kind of a principle that Elon has brought to the company. Everybody knows about Tesla. They don't spend any money on marketing and advertising, right? On advertising. And it's just because they have a really, really good product that their users are a fan of and want to promote and want to talk about. And that's always been my curiosity. Like my hope here with The Social Dilemma was that, I mean, the response has been mind blowing and above and beyond what we could have hoped for. But that was always the dream, was that people would just be talking about it, because the ideas or the issues or the thoughts that we were sharing and the way that we were sharing them were thought-provoking and made people want to go and talk about it with their friends and family. So that for me is that's the sweet spot. Like, can you make work that both you're so proud of and that is so meaningful and powerful that people just really want to engage and want to talk about it? Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Karen.
Okay, so let me go ahead and bring over August Burton. And let's see. Just to give you a little bit of background, August is an MFA student. And there we go.
Hello, August. Sweet background. You are muted.
Thank you, Alex, for acknowledging my question, and thank you, Jeff and Jonathan, for making this very poignant film. It's definitely needed for our times. So my question is, you've had the opportunity to speak to some of the most brilliant minds who have created these systems, and you've landed on the problem that the commoditization of our attentions is basically what this whole thing is at the crux of the problem. My question is, what did they propose are some solutions that might not have been on the film? And how do we make sure that these solutions are not biased in themselves because of our you know, the hegemonic structure, you know, the cultural hegemony? Right. These people are biased in themselves. So how do we know that the people who are making the solutions aren't oppressing certain demographics?
Absolutely, yeah, great questions. It's really, really tough, and this is one of the reasons why honestly, we didn't go too deep into solutions in the film, because it's not really clear what the easiest solutions are. There is no silver bullet. Just like there's no silver bullet for climate change, right? There are things that need to happen at the individual level, the corporate level, the government level. And similarly with this technology problem that we're faced with now, there's individual actions we can do. There's changes at the companies, there's potential regulatory options, but it's really, really challenging to find a clean-cut, easy solution. I think that the biggest thing that needs to happen is that we need to get off the business model. That's starting point. That's just like the V1. We need to do that as a minimum. It'd be seemingly, in my mind, very challenging for some of the companies to switch off of that. But Twitter is a technology platform that could potentially switch off of it, where the users find value in the product and might actually pay for it in a meaningful way for certain demographics, in particular around news and journalism, right? So I think there are some platforms that could make a transition like that. But after you get off of the business model and just realign the incentives with humanity, then you have to look really heavily. I mean, like, we make this point explicitly in the film, that it's mostly white men that are working at these companies that have built these technologies, right? And so the unconscious bias that's happening through the way the code is being written is revealed in the way the algorithms operate. This is, I'm going to share an example that doesn't apply to the social media companies, but it's something that Kathy O'Neill talks about in Weapons of Mass Destruction. There are algorithms that now function around prison sentencing recommendations. So if a judge is faced with somebody and trying to figure out what a prison sentence recommendation might be, those recommendations are based on historical data of people who've gone to prison in the past. And in many cases, that data is racist data that is just perpetuating the same system that has existed already. So the algorithms aren't transcending what we're trying to overcome, they're just replicating it. There are hiring algorithms that some companies have used, where in this particular company, the hiring algorithm recommended men named Jared who played lacrosse, because traditionally men who named Jared who played lacrosse were the more successful people at that company. And this goes to the reality that these algorithms are opaque. Like, nobody has access into seeing what they're doing. So you have this invisible code hidden on these computers that are literally redesigning the future of our society, and nobody has insight into what's happening there or why. So, I mean, we need change in leadership. We need change in the employee structures. We need change in the executives at the companies. We need insight into the algorithms. We should have transparency into the algorithms, so people like Kathy O'Neill can go in and audit the algorithm and say, hey, look, this is where your blind spots are in your code that you've written, or these are the blind spots in the data for your facial recognition technology, where it's not working on everybody. It's giving, you know, different types of results for different audiences. I can keep going. This is a really, really complex set of issues. My optimism and hope is that as more and more people are realizing it, we're going to get new types of technology, new types of social media, new types of platforms that come out that are really designed in humanity's interest, that are designed for society. Like, I was thinking the other day, I was having this idea around, like, what would social media look like if it actually made me feel better after I was done using it, right? What if it was a social media platform of like, hey, me and my 8 closest friends are in this group, and it regularly checks in with us around what are the problems that we're dealing with as a community and as a friend circle. And people can say, you know, this is what I'm struggling with right now. And we can all say, these are the things that we're struggling with. And it could guide us towards conversations and resources to help us have, like, you know, long 2-hour phone calls on a Wednesday night, so that we can help each other grow and learn and develop as humans, and challenge us with our thoughts, or provide resources to make us question our assumptions. Like, that could exist. Like, I'd put $10 a month into something like that for me and my close friends to have deep, meaningful conversation. I mean, I think COVID has only shown us how much we are social animals and how much we need human connection. And right now, the most available thing is this social media platform of choice that gives us this false sense of connection and isn't really optimized towards what humans need. And so, like, who's going to make that app? Who's going to make that platform? That's going to be the next billion-dollar company, right? Where I leave using it on a Wednesday night after 2 hours of conversation with my closest friends, where we've now helped each other develop as human beings, right? That's my hope. And I see those things coming out because those are ideas that society needs, that humanity wants. You know, I don't want to, this is not like a plug for Clubhouse, but there is a new platform called Clubhouse that's happening in Silicon Valley. And it's this audio only version of a social media platform. It's like it's like still on an invite only stage right now. And so it's not fully open, but they're rethinking what social media could be, right? It's people coming together for long, in-depth conversations, and they're still figuring out a lot of the problems within their platform. But it's so different than the other things that exist. So I have hope that we're going to continue to make more and more platforms like that provide actual value for humanity, and serve our needs. I hope that got to your question. I kind of went on a long ramble there.
Like, chat party line.
Yeah, potentially. But like, look, we're having this Zoom conversation. The 4 of us right now are having instantaneous, simultaneous, 2-way conversation where, like, we're not in the same room, but we're able to have an in-depth conversation with nuance, right? Like, there are 42 muscles in the face that these microscopic movements of our facial muscles are conveying so much information. And if I'm saying something, I see August nodding your head, right? And it's like, oh, you're affirming what I'm saying. Great, keep going. Like, there's something there that is innate to the human experience. That gets lost on a phone call, but you're still getting a lot of information. But then that gets lost even more in text format. And then you chop the text down to 280 characters, and context doesn't exist. Like you've lost all the nuance and complexity of the idea. And so it's really, really easy to take something out of context in a handful of words. And somebody might have meant something as a genuine joke, but somebody doesn't read it that way. And then that gets like perpetuated. Now everybody's just responding to that. And it's lost the original intent in a really crazy way. We're dealing with that with the film, with the social dilemma. Like we have a clip in the movie where we're talking about misinformation around COVID. And we have a bunch of people talking about conspiracy theories in the film. And there's a particular section where we're talking about 5G and COVID misinformation around 5G. And there was a clip that somebody posted of a tower being knocked down, and the caption is 5G, people are pulling down 5G towers because of COVID. The footage wasn't actually of that. The footage was Hong Kong protesters pulling down a smart tower with facial recognition technology. They were pulling it down in protest for the Chinese government, against the Chinese government. And so that was the original video footage that was used out of context in this social media post. So we thought it was like this brilliant thing. We're going to put this in there, like so many layers of how like this is misinformation on misinformation. And then people pulled that clip from the movie and posted it on Twitter saying that the social dilemma is propagating misinformation. And then other people replicated that, and like people just lost the whole point. And now a bunch of people were saying that we were propagating misinformation through the use of that clip. And it was like, that was our whole point, like the whole point. And yet it came so full circle in this very bonkers way. So anyway, I'm just on a rant about that, but I hope I got to your question, August.
No, you definitely did. I appreciate it. And if you can you send me an invite to Clubhouse? Because I'd love to join.
That's funny.
No, but thank you.
We can offline. I don't know if I have invites, but yeah.
All right, cool.
Thanks, man.
Okay, so let's take two final questions. We'll start with Frank Ding. And let's see. So Frank is a junior in production.
Awesome. Sweet. And you definitely don't have your standard webcam hooked up to your computer right now, so.
Yeah, first of all, hi. Thanks so much for taking my question. And Jeff and Jonathan, I love the film.
Awesome, thank you.
And first, just a quick note before my question. I take a lot of visual inspiration from Instagram. So cool. Now that I've learned more about how the algorithms work, I think that's really valuable for how I use the platforms productively and not getting sucked into clicking things that I know the algorithm will want to feed me more of, but actually clicking on things that I want to see in terms of work. So yeah.
Awesome. And that's the thing. There's a lot of brilliant, beautiful art on Instagram. Like I hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of my film production classes right now is currently in the documentary phase. So my question is like a slightly more technical question, I guess, about filmmaking rather than the actual topic. But how do you balance fact with fiction in the narrative depictions of how social media impacts the lives of teenagers and young adults? And I'm just wondering if you could talk about the ethics in the documentary genre where truth is so important.
Yeah, great, really, really great questions. Nonfiction fits this really weird limbo stage where there is no real journalistic standard or code that anybody's like signing up to make a film. I actually had a background in journalism myself in high school where I went to Stuyvesant High School in Manhattan, and we had editors from the New York Times that came in and taught our journalism class on a weekly basis. And so it was a very, very privileged, rare, exceptional circumstance where I had this education in high school around journalistic integrity that's made a huge influence on me. And I think a lot of our production team also cares about journalistic integrity in a deep, meaningful way. So in part, it's been surrounding ourselves with people who care about it in the first place. Around the narrative portions of the film, a lot of that came from very, very deep conversations with the engineers who work on this and understand it really well. to better understand what exactly is going on and how this stuff is designed. So the anthropomorphizing of the algorithms that we have in the film is actually genuinely based on the core tenets and the core principles of a lot of the algorithms at fill in the blank company. So around growth, around advertising, and around engagement, those are kind of three big pillars of how a social media platform operates. So that's how we anthropomorphized each of the three versions of Vinnie Carthaizer in the film. So in many ways, like the way we're representing that and the ideas of auctioning people, like every time you do a Google search, an auction is being run on you uniquely, like individually you are being auctioned at that moment in time. Google is operating over 60,000 auctions a second for every single search that's happening on the platform, right? So for us, it was really trying to understand how the platforms work so that we could bring that to life in a very, very authentic way. And then we were working with our subjects to best understand that and to make sure that we were representing the technical aspects in a very, very accurate way. So that the technical part was the most critical to us. The family story was where we had a bit more leniency and flexibility, and we wanted to bring out the ideas that we had heard from different people. So from families that we had spoken to, from different experts, some of our partners at Common Sense Media, we were hearing stories about how we were learning about how kids were interacting with technology in different ways. As I mentioned earlier, that rabbit hole article that preceded it, The Making of a YouTube Radical, that was another touch point in terms of how we wanted to represent the narrative storyline. So there's a real challenge in finding that balance. And for us, it was trying to understand the facts and the science and the engineering as best as we possibly could, bringing that to life through the script, getting feedback on that from experts who understood it really, really well, and then also through a lot of testing and through test screenings and focus groups and just seeing how does it relate, is this resonating with people, and massaging it in the edit along those lines too. It's a great question though, because there is no strict guideline on any of this, right? There's no formula or there's no real signed code of ethics around journalistic integrity. And also the style and approach that we were going for here, I was looking to make something that a lot of people would resonate with. You know, we also had the option, one thing that we considered at one point in time was to turn this into a 6-hour series or an 8-hour series or a multi-part thing. We easily could have filled 8 episodes of content, no problem. But part of what my intention was and motivation, I was concerned that if we stretched it out to that amount of time, that it wouldn't engage as many people. It wouldn't be a zeitgeist conversation in the same way. It would have fallen into a smaller niche of audiences that were just interested in the tech itself. And I didn't want to make the movie for a tech audience. I wanted it to be something that my mom would watch or my family would watch and be like, well, wait a second, maybe I do have to think about how I use this thing every day. So that was one of the hopes in the thinking of what medium and what style and what format was most appropriate.
Got it. Thanks so much.
Cool. Thanks.
Frank, before we let you go, what are you working with over there? What kind of webcam are you using?
It's my mirrorless camera hooked up to my computer.
Okay.
Sweet.
Nice. All right.
Yeah, we're gonna have John. You're gonna have to pull out a red and have a live hookup from full frame
I would say,
sensors.
like putting me to shame over here.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take one last one. This one is from one of our alumni, Tamara Rosenfeld. Moving you over now.
Hello. Can you guys hear me?
Tamara. Yes.
Hi.
Awesome.
First off, thank you so much for all your films you've done. I think you've touched on some of, or the most important issues of our time.
Oh,
and getting these things out are so important. And as a fellow filmmaker, it's really, I think these are the issues that we should be making films about a lot. So, so thank you for that. And I just want to hear more about your process of getting your films greenlit or funded. Was it easier after you had the last 2 films, or has it just always been a challenge? And at what point did you bring on the experts that you spoke with throughout the film?
Really great questions. Sometimes I feel like this is the case. Sometimes I don't feel like the case, that it gets easier every time. I think in general it does actually get easier with every film. And from a fundraising perspective, I do think that has been the case, at least for us. The hardest thing I've ever done, I think, in many ways, was fundraising for Chasing Ice. So first feature film out of the gate, before you have any, any awards under your belt or any accolades or anything like that, it's really, really challenging. At the time, so in college, I had made a couple of shorts, and some of them went and played festivals, and we got some awards. But they were all pretty small things in the scheme of things. But fundraising for Chasing Ice was incredibly difficult. The process on that was just a lot of self-driven editing, and producers that were working pro bono that had a lot more experience than I did and a lot more knowledge than I did. And it was building as many people onto the team as possible that had more knowledge than I did. So Paula Dupree-Pessman and Jerry Aronson, our two producers on the film, just taught me so much in that process and gave the film more and more credibility beyond what I could bring to the table with my limited resume. It was also then just a lot of I think you get this flexibility in nonfiction a little bit more than you do in fiction, where I just kept editing stuff and kept shooting on my own and kept editing on my own and started showing more and more here's a scene, here's a sequence, here's a rough cut of the film. And I could do that incrementally because it wasn't costing as much to shoot an entire feature narrative film. So there's some benefits that I think you can have in the nonfiction film world because of that. At this point, all of these projects have been independent, self-developed with my team. And in terms of greenlighting, there's a phase that happens where I just go back and forth with my team a lot around, is this an interesting idea or not? Is this worth dedicating 3 years of our life to? My producer, Larissa, is very, very passionate about climate change. And when I told her in 2017, I think we should make a movie on social media, she was like, what the hell's wrong with you? That was her response, was at the level of are you crazy? Climate, the planet's falling apart and you want to talk about phones and social media. And then it was really only when I showed her, hey, look, if you do a Google search for climate changes, different people get different results based on where they are. We can't solve climate change unless we solve this tech problem. And that was the thing that sort of convinced her and had her come on board. I have been raising money for the projects is certainly challenging. We've now been at this point, we've been able to build a network of people who have supported us project after project after project and have both believed in us, supported the work, and we've built really, really strong relationships. It takes more time and effort to maintain a quantity of relationships with teams like that, but it has allowed us to maintain the flexibility and the independence to do the work that we want to do without having, in some cases, a production company that's really micromanaging the project. So we have an incredible amount of trust with our partners. And that's been, as an independent filmmaker, the absolute best thing that I've ever been able to achieve. But it's really, really hard to build out those networks and to build out those communities that are willing and able to support you. I think that's the biggest challenge at the starting point. I also now am in the position where I tend to try to put seed money in myself into the projects, where I don't need to get approval from others just yet. If I can kickstart and put some seed funding in to do the first couple of interviews and to shoot some stuff, now we can make a sizzle or get some material put together so I can use that to fundraise and say, hey, look at these experts that we just spoke to, and this is the backbone of the film we want to pursue. And then also it actually does give me a little bit of additional, I don't want to say leverage, but a seat at the table with the investors, because I too am an investor in this. I am making decisions based on what's best for the film and what's based on the finances for the project, because I can't afford to lose this money that I'm putting in. This is almost like higher stakes for me than it might be for some of the investors. Certainly in terms of net worth, I think it's a lot more of a percentage. And so those are just things that I've found have been able to help build trust with the investors as well. I'm representing their interest with the money, and I'm not going to abuse the money that's come into this project because I am on that team with you as well. So Those are just some quick thoughts. In all of our films, we've completely independently produced and premiered, in our case, at Sundance all 3 times with these films. And it was at Sundance where the films were picked up for distribution. So Netflix always came on board after the film was completed. I just, for me personally, to be able to know that I'm making exactly what I want to make and what I want to say, that has been incredibly meaningful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did I get to your question, Tamara? Yeah.
Yeah, they're
Cool.
I mean, and your films are fantastic, and thank you for pushing through and keeping and finishing to make them and doing whatever you could get to make them. I guess the one other thing I just had within that was, is there a specific time when you bring on the experts or something you do specifically to reach out to those experts, or how you end up sourcing your experts?
I think it depends on every project. In the case of The Social Dilemma, Tristan Harris was the initial catalyst for the entire concept. And so in sitting with him and having conversations with him and learning more and then doing research, it was really just the eye-opening conversations with him that set the course for the whole film. In some of those cases, I do tend to want to do an interview pretty quickly with them. Also not knowing where the story might go. If you're following a protagonist over time, you want to capture those early moments as well to be able to get the mindset from that early starting point. So if you're able to capture any change in the protagonist, you have a greater difference between the beginning and end states. So once we realized that Tristan had a story to tell, we started following him around. And very soon after, we tried to set up a whole series of interviews with a handful of different experts. For me also, there's a bit of research we can do in advance, but the interview process is its own exploratory process. And coming to the table with genuine questions in the interviews is one of the most valuable things, because if I have a conversation with, I found this to be the case with Chasing Ice, where the subject, James Baylog, he and I got to know each other really, really well. And we spent a lot of time together. We had a lot of shared experiences together. And when I was interviewing him late in production, if I did the interview, those interviews tended to be really, really flat. Like, they were not compelling interviews. And I realized at one point it's because he knew me so well and he knew that I had these experiences with him, that it's like telling your best friend about that time whatever event happened. They know the story, and intrinsically you just don't, there's no real magic to the delivery. I'm not calling it like a performance necessarily, but there's no real human to human connection. So in Chasing Ice, one of the things that we did actually was I brought one of our producers, Paula, on to do one of our final interviews with James Baylog, just to keep the freshness there. Similarly with Chasing Coral, deep in our production timeline, when we did our very last interview with Zach Rago, instead of me interviewing him, my producer Larissa interviewed him, and I just sat right behind Larissa. I sat over her shoulder. And so he could have the conversation with Larissa. It was a genuine human-to-human connection. Like, she was asking real questions that she really wanted to know, and Zach could answer to her in an authentic way. And then I could but tell her about that other thing. And okay, great, let me tell you that story. Or I'd whisper something into Larissa's ear on push harder on this question or what have you. But it was that dynamic that was really authentic. So in the case with Tristan and some of the people in The Social Dilemma, very early on, I was eager to jump in and do interviews because I wanted to have those authentic questions. For me, if I look back on the transcripts from 2017, I remember the naivety that was in my questions at the time. And wow, I forgot that I didn't know that thing. And that's when I learned that idea. And that insight came during that answer from that person in that interview. And in many ways, the interviews themselves are the documentation of my learning process and my journey over the course of the film, supplementing it also with reading as much as I can. But there's just something very, very magical about the interview process that if you can capture that, you can get these real gems. Just one last thought to add. There are times where I found I've had to play dumb during interviews, which can be really, really painful when I know the answer to the question, but you kind of sometimes have to play dumb to just get the person to answer it in the way that you're looking for, or answer it in a way where is insightful or might resonate with an audience. So this is something that I've just found over time, kind of the practice of it in terms of the subtle interview techniques that you can bring about to get the delivery that you're hoping in terms of conveying an idea to somebody who might not be thinking about this on a regular basis. So I don't know, that a lot of that's just come through trial and error. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like how you gave them space at the beginning of the social dilemma, and just like it's very beautiful, really cool interview moments there.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you.
But yeah, thank you so much. I'll
Thank you.
taking up the time. I appreciate you answering my questions, and have
Absolutely. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys so much for spending so much time with us tonight.
Yeah.
I think we managed to successfully completely avoid the latest debate.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, thank you all for attending this over the VP debate. I mean, I'm super curious. I might have to go catch up on it right now.
I don't know, something about not having to watch it in real time makes me feel better.
Right. Yeah, that sounds good too. Yeah.
At least now you know you can pause it.
Yes,
Yeah.
or fast forward. But just a reminder, everyone.
Yep.
Get your ballots.
Please vote. One brief story there. Lee Unkrich, we premiered the film. We premiered Chasing Ice at Sundance in 2012, and on the shuttle on the bus to leave the theater to go to another venue afterwards, Lee Unkrich was sitting on the bus, and I was like, oh my God, like Lee Unkrich is over there. And he had just seen the film, and he offered this very complimentary comments about Chasing Ice, and I was like, oh my goodness, like so huge.
Did you take a selfie?
I did not take a selfie. Nope. But the conversation was remembered for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I really look forward to everything the two of you guys do next, and hopefully we'll be able to do this in person next time.
Absolutely.
But stay safe, stay healthy. Great. Thank you so much for making this movie.
Thank you all
for spending the night.
Thanks everyone for joining and for asking all these awesome questions.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks.